Welcome back. I'm planting potatoes today. I got my roll maker thingy here, dragged out some slots. I actually adjusted it so the digger thingies on either side of it went deeper, so I made furrows for my potatoes. And these potatoes we cut and I let them dry out so they healed up a little bit, and they have sprouted already. They've got the little eyes appearing on them, which means they've left dormancy. And now I am throwing down some of this Steve's mix here, Solomon's Gold micronutrient solution, because as you know, we have very bad soil here. And we are putting in the biggest bed I have ever done of the world's best survival staple. If you live in a temperate climate or a cooler tropical climate where you can grow potatoes, yield-wise, they will beat grains like crazy. They also have some decent nutrition in them. They've even got vitamin C, and they store pretty well. They grow easily. They produce pretty quickly. This is like your survival, fantastic survival staple here. There's a reason that once potatoes were discovered growing down there, when the Europeans came across them and said, man, these things are great, they ended up spreading all over the entire world. They got traded everywhere, went all over the place, because they're a fantastic crop. And now that I am not in the tropics, I can actually put in potatoes. So that's why I'm doing so many. There are 60 pounds of potatoes planted out here, and I'm gonna cover them all up today. We're getting ahead of the season a little bit. If you plant them before your last frost date, it's usually fine. The tops of them will freeze back if you get another frost, but they need that cool season. If they don't get a cool season, they often rot, have other issues, or don't produce well. And we've got to get ahead of the summer here because it's going to get really, really hot. As many of you know, women are always writing me and saying, David the Good, where did you get that incredible physique? And sometimes I answer, I inherited it from my mom. Other times, I tell the truth. And I say, I got it from growing potatoes. Not from eating potatoes, mind you, but from growing them. Once you put your potatoes in the trenches, you got to put a little food in those trenches unless you have good soil. But once you put your potatoes in the trenches, you got to cover them up. So what I did, I put them at 3 feet apart, 1 foot apart in the rows, and then I dig out the center to start covering them up. They need to be covered. So I want them to be covered to a couple of inches to start. You can go 3 or 4 inches. It also depends on how loose your soil is. I mean, Ruth Stout used to grow them just by laying them on the ground and throwing straw over the top. But you got to cover them up, and then they're going to start to grow pretty soon here. Once they feel themselves covered by the earth and they get moist in there, they'll be happy to grow. And then as they grow, you hill them up a little higher and higher as they grow so you can cover them, because what will happen is the tubers will start to burst out from the ground and mound up, and if they get sunlight, they start to turn green, and everybody knows you're not supposed to eat green potatoes. And the reason for that is a compound called solanine, which makes sense because they are solanum. It's a toxin created by members of the Solanaceae. So they'll make this toxin to protect themselves, and it comes along with them photosynthesizing. So if the tubers are photosynthesizing, you're going to get solanine, and you don't want that. So you mound them up as they grow and as they go to make sure that as the potatoes develop, they're not getting any sunlight. They've got to be beneath the ground, or you'll give yourself a stomach ache, a headache, sore joints, and potentially vomiting, which is not a good part of survival gardening. The closer you get to the equator, the more you generally want to rely on roots. Potatoes are kind of in that sweet spot between the tropical, the subtropical, the temperate. Zone 8, Zone 7, Zone 6, Zone 5. There's a lot of places where you can grow potatoes because there's that short season. They're one of those unique roots, which is technically a tropical root, that can grow way up into a temperate zone because we grow it like an annual. If you get further down to the equator, you get a lot of other things that you can grow other than potatoes. In the hot tropics, potatoes are not your friends. You know, that's where you would grow true yams, Dioscorea species. That's where you would grow sweet potatoes. That's where you would grow a lot of tree crops like breadfruit and plantains and bananas. You eat bananas green, you've got a starch crop, very much like a root. Cassava, all these things, perfect tropical crops. Malanga, right, taro. When you're dealing with survival, as you move further north, it becomes harder and harder to find good root crops that'll actually sail through for you. You can live on turnips if you have to, but as you move further north, you'll notice that grains really start to come into their own, like winter wheat, and flint corn grows up into the Midwest, and you get these fast season things that produce well. But potatoes are the root crop for the world. And I love to grow potatoes, but I didn't really have much luck growing them in the hot, humid tropics. So I'm very excited to be doing this here and to be putting potatoes in. And I'm growing extra potatoes for friends as well. And for those of you that say, potatoes, I could buy a bag of potatoes for $4. That's true. If you were to have everything totally collapse though, you would be very happy for potatoes. And if you ever try homegrown potatoes, you realize that there is no potato in the world that you can grow that tastes as good as a homegrown potato. Those $4 sacks of potatoes, they just don't have the flavor. If you want the best tasting French fries, the best tasting mashed potatoes, the best tasting stew, oh my goodness, there's nothing like it. There is nothing like a homegrown potato. People talk about homegrown tomatoes. Man, you get a sweet tomato right off the vine. It's so good. Absolutely true. Same thing goes for potatoes. The flavor is so much better, particularly when you take the time to mineralize the soil and feed the ground. Your garden probably has better soil than a lot of places where commercially grown potatoes are going over and over and over again. There's just, I don't know what it is. I have taken commercial potatoes that I got out of a dumpster. I saw this dumpster. Potatoes had been thrown in, a bunch of green ones, a few rotten ones, and I said, wouldn't it be interesting to just take those home and plant them and see what happens? So these are commercial varieties. It's not like they're any kind of special potatoes. I took them to my garden in Tennessee. I dug a few trenches. I threw the potatoes down in the trenches and I covered them up with some mulch and coffee grounds from the local coffee shop and some straw. And they grew in that garden and they bore me a whole bunch of potatoes. They were the same red skin potatoes, white skin potatoes. There were some Yukon Golds in there. There were some russets. Those potatoes tasted so good. They were like a different species. Totally worth doing. I don't know what it is that makes them taste so much better when you grow them at home, but they really do. And I think it has to do with the minerals, but hey, if you're a potato grower, you tell me. Anyhow, I wanted to bring you along a little bit and talk about potatoes because I really like potatoes. And if you want to learn more about survival gardening, check out my book, Grow or Die, The Good Guide to Survival Gardening. And if you live in Florida, check out my book, Florida Survival Gardening, which is specific to the Sunshine State, and a lot of the Deep South it works as well. Basically Zone 9 and 10. Thanks for joining me. Go plant some potatoes. And until next time, may your thumbs, but not your potatoes, always be green.
I buried my rabbit beneath the cherry tree one fine afternoon. Someday I know that we'll meet again on a fruit salad spoon.